Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're looking into how to turn obstacles upside down and use them to our advantage. We've got some really fascinating stuff for you today, like stories from history and business, even some ancient philosophy, too.
Yeah. It's really about changing how we think about challenges instead of just seeing roadblocks. We can learn to see them as chances to grow, maybe even opportunities to come up with something totally new.
For sure. And to get us started, let's jump into this story about a king. He wanted to teach his people about resilience, so what he did was he put this huge boulder right in the middle of the road, the main road, into his city.
Wow, that's pretty drastic. I wonder what he was trying to do with that. What was the point he was trying to make?
Well, he wanted to see how his people would react to this sudden obstacle. You know, would they just give up, get angry, or would they try to find a way around it?
Mm.
And as you can probably guess, most people were pretty discouraged when they came across this giant rock in their way.
Yeah, I can imagine. People probably had their routines, their plans for the day all set, and then boom, there's this big problem right in front of them.
Exactly. Some people grumbled, some complained, and some just, turned around and went back home. But then there was this one peasant. He just refused to be stopped. This guy didn't just stand there complaining. He started looking for tools, trying different things, and eventually, with a lot of effort and persistence, he managed to move that boulder out of the way.
Ah, that classic story of never giving up. But I bet there's a twist, right? These stories always have a little twist.
Oh, definitely. So underneath the boulder, he finds a purse full of gold coins and a note from the king. And the note said, "The obstacle in the path becomes the path. Never forget, within every obstacle is an opportunity to improve our condition."
That's a pretty deep message. It's not just about getting over the obstacle, but about seeing the good that could come from the challenge itself. Sounds like the king wasn't trying to punish his people, but to teach them a lesson.
It really gets you thinking, right? Because you might be facing your own, metaphorical boulders right now, at work, in your relationships, or even just trying to reach your own goals. The question is, will you let those obstacles stop you? Or would you find a way to use them to your advantage?
Yeah, and that's what we're really talking about today, right? How we see obstacles can determine whether we succeed in overcoming them. It's about seeing challenges not as roadblocks, but as opportunities for growth and learning.
Right. And one of the best examples of this is John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon. This guy started his career during one of the worst economic crises in American history, the Panic of 1857.
That's a really interesting case study. I mean, most people would understandably panic during a financial meltdown, right? They'd
Yeah.
be worried about just surviving, about minimizing their losses. But Rockefeller, he saw this as a chance to learn. He didn't let his emotions control him.
He was incredibly disciplined. When everyone else was making quick decisions based on fear, Rockefeller was carefully watching, analyzing the market, learning from the mistakes others were making. He was playing the long game.
It's like he was using this crisis as some kind of real-world business school. He wasn't just trying to make a quick buck. He was trying to understand the principles of success, even in the middle of all that chaos.
He famously said he was always inclined to see the opportunity in every disaster. And this wasn't just some motivational quote for him. It was a core principle that guided everything he did. And this ability to detach from the emotional turmoil and see things clearly, that's what allowed him to thrive when others were failing.
That's really important. It's not about pretending that the difficulties aren't real. It's about realizing that even within those difficulties, there might be hidden opportunities if we can train ourselves to see them.
So just like Rockefeller learned from a financial crisis, we can all learn from the challenges in our own lives. And that's a powerful takeaway, right? It's not about wishing for a life without obstacles, but about developing the mental tools and the emotional strength to turn those obstacles to our advantage.
Absolutely. This idea of objectivity and emotional control, it's not just for business either. We see it all the time in military history. Take General Dwight D. Eisenhower during World War II, for example.
Here's a situation where the stakes couldn't be higher, right? Eisenhower is up against the German Blitzkrieg, a terrifying new kind of warfare that seemed unstoppable at the time. And what does he do? He tells his generals, "The present situation is to be regarded as opportunity for us and not disaster." Can you imagine having that level of composure under that kind of pressure?
It's remarkable, really. He didn't try to downplay the situation or pretend things weren't bad. He just chose to see it from a different angle. Instead of being frozen by the threat, he saw it as a chance to outsmart the enemy, to use the weaknesses in their strategy against them. And that's what he did, right? At the Battle of the Bulge. He used the speed and aggression of the Blitzkrieg, But against the Germans, turned their own tactics into their downfall.
Yeah, really smart. So we see Rockefeller learning from this financial crisis and Eisenhower turning a terrifying new form of warfare into an advantage. They both show us that, it's not enough to just see the opportunity. You have to be brave enough to act on it, to seize the moment.
Exactly. Just having a positive outlook isn't enough. You actually have to take the leap, make the move, and one of the best examples of this is Amelia Earhart.
Amelia Earhart, her story is so inspiring. She was determined to be a pilot in the 1920s. The time when women were basically told they shouldn't even try to do things like that.
I mean, think about it. She got this offer to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. Sounds incredible, right?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But the thing was, she wouldn't actually get to pilot the plane. It was more like two men would be there to supervise her, and she wouldn't even get paid for it.
Yeah, it was basically a publicity stunt, right? They wanted to use the fact that she was a woman, but then they didn't actually want to acknowledge her skills or achievements.
And on top of all that, there was a real chance she might not survive the flight.
Yeah.
I mean, it was super risky back then. The technology wasn't what it is today.
Totally. I think anyone would understand if she had just said, nope, not doing it. The terms were bad, the risks were high, and what was she really going to get out of it?
But she didn't even hesitate.
Mm.
She said yes. Because for her, it wasn't about money or fame. It was about showing that women could be just as good as men at flying. It was about taking that step, even if it wasn't perfect, and moving towards her goal.
And remember that quote she had painted on her plane? Always think with your stick forward.
That's a great one.
Yeah, it's a powerful metaphor, right? Like in aviation, if you let your stick fall back, you lose lift and you stall. If you want to stay in the air, you got to keep moving forward.
And it's the same with life. We can't let ourselves get stuck in doubt or fear or trying to make everything perfect. We have to act, even if it's not perfect, to keep going toward what we want.
Sometimes that means just being persistent, putting in the effort, even when we run into roadblocks.
Speaking of persistence, what about Ulysses S. Grant and the siege of Vicksburg in the Civil War? Now, that was a tough spot to be in. Grant spent months trying to capture this city, Vicksburg. It was strategically super important. He tried everything attacking head-on, going around them, even trying to dig a new canal to change the Mississippi River.
Wow. And Vicksburg just held on, huh?
Yep. And the pressure was on Grant, too. He was losing men, getting criticized by his bosses, and then there was always the chance that Confederate reinforcements would show up.
Yeah, that's a lot to deal with.
But Grant, he wouldn't quit. His persistence, that absolute determination to take Vicksburg, it led him to a totally new strategy. He cut off his own supplies and lived off the land. That was a huge risk back then.
But it worked, didn't it?
It did. This move, going against what everyone thought you should do, it let Grant outsmart the Confederates and finally capture Vicksburg. That was a major turning point in the whole war.
That shows how being persistent can actually make you more creative. Because of the obstacles, Grant had to think outside the box and come up with something totally new.
Right. It's often when we're forced to go beyond our comfort zones that we come up with the most innovative solutions. Think about Thomas Edison and all those light bulb filaments he tried. He tested like thousands of materials before he found one that worked.
Thousands.
Yeah. Remember that quote, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Or another way to put it, persistence can be genius in disguise. Just like Edison, we might have to try a bunch of things before we find what works for us.
I like that. And this idea of trying things out over and over, that's at the core of innovation in so many fields. Like in tech, they talk about the minimum viable product, or MVP.
Right, the MVP. So the idea there is to get a basic version of your product out there as fast as you can, and then use the feedback from people who use it to make it better and better.
It's a process that's okay with failure, actually sees it as a chance to learn. It's not about being perfect the first time. It's about starting, getting feedback, and then refining things until you get what you want.
That's a good way to look at it. It takes the pressure off of having to have all the answers right away. It lets you jump into the unknown and use those early mistakes as a way to grow. But if we really want to turn obstacles upside down, we need more than just the right perspective and taking action. We need something deeper, something that helps us find strength even when the challenges seem impossible to overcome.
Yeah, you're talking about the will, that inner strength that helps us weather the storm, that lets us stay resilient when things get tough.
And when we talk about unwavering will, I think one of the most powerful examples is Reuben Hurricane Carter.
Oh, absolutely. Carter's story, I mean, it's incredible. It really shows the strength of the human spirit, you know? A man who just refused to be broken, even by the worst circumstances. He was wrongly convicted of murder and spent almost 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
It's hard to even imagine that, right? The injustice, the despair, to feel like you have absolutely no control over your own life.
Mm.
But Carter, he refused to let that define him. He said, I am not and never will be powerless.
Mm.
And he really lived by those words.
Yeah, he did. He wouldn't even wear a prison uniform. He wouldn't eat the prison food. He spent all his time studying law, fighting to prove he was innocent. He held on to his dignity, his sense of self, even in a prison cell.
It would have been so easy to just give up, to become bitter and angry. But Carter, he made a different choice. He chose to focus on what he could control, his mind, his spirit, his determination to clear his name.
And that's such a key point. We all face those times in life where we feel powerless, like things are spinning out of control. But Carter's story reminds us, even then, we still have a choice. We can let those feelings of helplessness take over, or we can focus on what we can actually do something about, no matter how small.
It's about finding that inner strength, that resilience that we all have inside. And it's about believing that even when things seem darkest, we have the power to shape our own future. We see that same spirit in the story of Tommy John, the baseball pitcher, who came back from what should have been a career-ending injury.
Towing John, yeah. The doctors told him he had like a 1 in 100 chance of ever pitching again.
Those are pretty bad odds. But John, he wasn't interested in the odds. All he wanted to know was, is there a chance? Any chance at all?
He just needed a sliver of hope.
Right. Because even if there was just the smallest possibility, he was going to put in the work. He wasn't focused on all the reasons it might not work, just the one reason it could.
And that's where focusing on what we can control really makes a difference. John couldn't control how bad his injury was, but he could control his effort, how dedicated he was to rehab. And he did the work, the tough, painful work, to rebuild his arm.
It reminds me of the serenity prayer, accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The Stoics had a similar idea, too, about what's up to us and what isn't.
Exactly. When we focus on what we can control, we can use our energy where it matters, make progress even when things seem impossible. But it's also about being present, right?
Yeah.
Focusing on the here and now. We can't change the past, and worrying about the future just steals our energy from today.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. A lot of successful businesses were actually started during really tough times, like during recessions and depressions.
Mm.
Companies like FedEx, Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, even Disney, they were all founded during those periods.
It makes you wonder, huh? Why would anyone start a business during a recession?
Well, I think a big part of it is that those founders were so busy building, so focused on what they were doing, that they didn't have time to get paralyzed by fear or worry about the economy. They were focused on what they could control, their vision, their effort, their product.
Makes sense. They were present, persistent, and willing to take risks because they really believed in what they were doing.
Right. And that brings us to another important part of turning obstacles upside down, challenging assumptions, thinking differently.
And when it comes to that, who better to look at than Steve Jobs? He was the visionary behind Apple, and he had this amazing ability to see past limitations. He could imagine products and technology that most people thought were impossible.
He even called it his reality distortion field. It was this incredible belief that he could bend reality to his will, that he could do anything if he set his mind to it.
Some people might have thought that was arrogant, but it was that very mindset that allowed him to create products that completely revolutionized entire industries. He just refused to accept the limitations that everyone else took for granted.
There's a great story about the development of the Macintosh mouse. Jobs wanted a mouse that could move smoothly in any direction. And at the time, everyone thought that was impossible.
No way to do it, they said.
But when an engineer told him it couldn't be done, Jobs said, find someone who can. He just wouldn't accept that something was impossible.
What a great example.
And there's a powerful lesson in that for all of us. What assumptions are we holding on to that might be holding us back? What could we achieve if we challenged the status quo and allowed ourselves to think differently?
It's about believing that we can do great things, that we can push past what we think is possible.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I think the main takeaway is this. Obstacles are going to happen. They're a part of life. But how we choose to see them, what actions we take, and the strength of our will, Those are the things that determine whether they stop us in our tracks or help us grow.
And maybe the most important question we can ask ourselves is, what one small thing can I do today to turn an obstacle in my life into an opportunity? How can I change my perspective, take a bold step forward, tap into my own inner strength, and use that challenge as a way to grow?
That's something for us all to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep turning those obstacles upside down.